Hello there, and welcome to the English Language Club. It's time for our weekly live stream. I'm Colin Monroe, and this is Tony Culper. We are your teachers for today, and every week so far. So it's really hot here in the UK. What's it like in Canada, Tony?
Oh, it was very hot the last couple of weeks, but this weekend and this week it's actually been quite cool.
Oh, that's nice. Lucky you.
Yeah.
So
it wasn't lucky us last week and the week before.
Was it? Then it was really hot, yeah?
Yeah, it was really hot for the last couple of weeks.
We've got a few people watching, so please do say hi. And if you have a question, please ask the question as well. That would be great. We've got AJ. He's got a question about the hot weather, which is why I brought it up. But also Sonia is watching. She's got some comment. She's made a comment about the summer. Yep. So yeah, thanks for that. Say hi. Janine's Janine Hamilton. Hi. Yes. So if you do have any questions, please get them coming in. So let's start with this question from AJ. It's not really a question, more a comment about the weather. Where is it? Yeah. How can you describe warm weather other than saying it's hot? So that's a good question for this season here in the UK, at least. Well, I guess we often say it's boiling.
Well, I was going to say there are some words that we use that actually talk about, they're literally talking about it being hot, but we use a lot of metaphorical language for this. It's boiling, It's roasting.
Yeah.
You could fry an egg on the sidewalk, right? Lots of metaphorical things, but then there are a few things like sweltering, which is literally, sweltering means that it's too hot. You're sweating.
That means
the
you're
air
sweating.
is stagnant.
Yeah.
So this kind of thing. So yeah, you can. Some of them are literal and some of them are metaphorical. We might, like, not talking about it. We could say there's a lot of sun. Sometimes you would say it's a nice day to be in the shade. Right. Or it's it's a beautiful day to be indoors. Right. Sometimes people will say something like that to talk about a day that's overly hot.
If it's too hot. Yeah.
Too hot.
Funny, here in the UK, because it's not hot very often, we're famous for having a lot of rain. So hot weather is always normally referred to as a good thing. So we don't use phrases like that very much to say, being hot normally has a good connotation.
Yeah. Yes.
In the UK, whereas if in hot countries that's not the case. It's often bad weather is when it's too hot, but you can never really be. Well, I guess people do complain. People in England complain whatever the weather is. If it's hot, it's too hot. If it's cold, it's too cold. If it's raining, it's too rainy. So a good expression is the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. That's the full expression, but we often contract that or shorten that to the grass is always greener, which means sort of whatever you don't have, that's what you want. And then when you get it, you don't like it, you complain. Yeah. So on the theme of weather, somebody was asking about rain. So we could quickly talk about that. Banu was asking about, rain. So it's funny, isn't it? Cooking metaphors seem to relate to weather. We talked about boiling and roasting. Those are cooking metaphors. And for rain, there's one we say pouring, which means, to pour a liquid. If it's raining a lot, we often say it's pouring. Or the other famous one is, it's not related to cooking, but it's raining cats and dogs. It's one of the most famous idioms.
Yes,
because it's so disconnected from the literal meaning. So yeah, can you think of any more? More of it? Well,
some kind of metaphor, exaggerating sort of thing. We say, a torrential. It's a torrent. Of course, torrent literally it comes from the word for a waterfall, right? So like. A really heavy rain isn't actually like a waterfall, but it's a metaphor. yeah, oftentimes we'll describe the kind of rain. Like drizzle is where it's raining a little bit, but not very much. Or pouring, spitting. Yeah, you hear that a lot here as well. Yeah, someone might say, well, it was thunderstorming, which isn't really. Thunderstorm is not really a verb, but we use it.
You can't. Yeah.
But you can do that in English. You can absolutely use something that's not really a verb as a verb. But people often want to know, what kind of rain is it? If you're talking about the rain, don't just say it was raining, because there's a huge difference between showers is something that we would say a lot here. Like if there's every now and then there's a little bit of rain, but not enough to really soak things, right? But that's totally different from a thunderstorm. In North America, we talk a lot about cool fronts and warm fronts. We say it's a cool front, which means there's rain and then the temperature is dry. And it's cooler. That's what we had this weekend. So we had a really big cool front. It was hot last week.
That's sort of what they would say on a weather forecast, right? Because that's getting into the kind of scientific.
Well, terms. It's not really. It's that's just the popular. Like that's not really the. Anyway, people do talk about that. They're like, "Oh, we're having a cool front," or something like that. Or types of storms.
That's so much in British English, but
I didn't think so. I thought that was more of a North American thing.
Yeah, you do hear that language though in weather forecasts on television.
Of course, yeah.
And
of course, depending on the kind of, if it's a storm, some places have nor'easters. It's a kind of storm that traditionally came out of the Northeast. And of course, hurricanes, tropical storms, lots of different ways to talk about rain.
Janie says it's a beautiful day, and Sonia says we have tropical weather always in Honduras. So that's nice. We should visit Honduras. That would be nice. Anyway, we've got some questions coming in. Pinar, I see your question, and I think Gabrielle has a question. But before we do that, before we get into those, I just want to quickly answer some questions from recent comments, because I've already replied to some comments saying that I would. So here is a question about pronunciation from A. Jamir, who says, are the words watch and catch rhyming words? So that's a great question, because obviously they look like they rhyme, because there's only one letter difference. And I guess the ending is the same, the ch sound, but I don't think that's really enough to say that they rhyme, is it?
No, you usually at least have to have the ending consonant and the ending vowel. There are different types of rhyming that require different amounts of similarity, but usually at minimum it would need to have the same vowel sound.
So the word watch, it's got a o sound, and that's a very British pronunciation. I guess in American you would say, Tony,
it would still be different, because it's watch, and catch, right? So they're still not the same, but yes, it is pronounced, watch is pronounced differently in the US.
So in British English it's more of an o, whereas it's in the word watch though, it is very similar between the British.
It is very similar.
It's more of an r in American, watch, and watch in British English. So if you want to sound British, try to perfect that o sound. And in the word catch, it's the a sound. So o and a. That's the difference. That's why they don't rhyme.
And that's actually pretty common. A often makes one of those two sounds, right?
Yeah.
So it's fairly normal when you see an A, you got to kind of, the main two ways to pronounce it are more a related or more ah related. Father versus and call versus catch and hat, right? Yeah.
Okay, and the next one, similar, talking about two different sounds. The Sindur says schwa and the wedge, the sound. How to identify? So these are sort of very, very similar sounds. The schwa, I hate to call it the schwa sound, but everyone does. That's pronounced sort of it's a very neutral sound. You don't really do much with your mouth. It's very it's very relaxed. It's and then the ah. So how to identify? Yeah, so, I mean, because the spelling is so inconsistent. Yeah.
The thing about it, like, you can't necessarily get it from the spelling. The key in English, now, this is not going to be true of every time the schwa symbol is used in the IPA, but in English, we don't differentiate. Like, the schwa is not one sound. It's the symbol we use for any super short vowel, called a reduced vowel or a half vowel. Some languages have have several of these with different sounds. But in English, we just have the one, and the actual sound you use is not always going to be the same. So if you can change and use a short sound other than then you know it's a schwa. Like, if I say about, like, it all sounds the same because I'm saying it so shortly. Whereas if I change, let's see, what's a wedge? A word that has wedge in it. Under. You can't say ender or inder or onder. It's wrong, right? And so the wedge is a full vowel. If the sound is actually an important part of the word's pronunciation, it can't be a schwa. Yeah. The schwa is only there if it's like tiny, tiny, tiny sound. You're making a vowel, but barely. You start making a vowel and then you stop.
So the schwa sound is usually unstressed.
That's true too.
Under that first vowel sound is stressed, so it
couldn't be a schwa.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a really good question. And I mean, how to identify just from looking at the sort of words as they're written in English?
Oh, there wouldn't be.
It is very difficult to know. You just have to know the words.
You have to or sound it out. Like, if you listen to it, if it's pronounced very, very shortly, then it's a schwa, right? But again, also schwa can be pronounced many different ways, whereas wedge is pretty much just that one way.
Yeah. But with all the vowels, there's not just one way of saying
but
there's an infinite number of ways of saying vowel, of making a vowel sound, but they all fall into these categories. Or they're all, they're close. Each one is closest to one of those sounds.
But again, in English, the schwa is not a sound. We use it for all of the super short vowel sounds in English. You can make any vowel and make it very short, and that is a schwa in English. It's not a specific individual sound. It might be in some other, like when you're transcribing a different language. But in English, the schwa is just used for any really short vowel sound because they're all kind of interchangeable in English.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Okay. So
speaking of IPA symbols, were we going to talk about that now, or do we want to?
Oh, yes. Yes, there was another question that we had from a chat, but then there was a question that it tied in with. Here we are. Yeah. So we got a question from today from Suhir, who says, how to get good pronunciation? Or it should be, how do you get good pronunciation? And yeah, this ties in with another question we got from the chat, which was basically, I mean, phonetics is a tool for pronunciation. And somebody had watched one of my video on the introduction to phonetics, and they were sort of complaining that this isn't English. All these symbols, we don't have them in the alphabet.
It's not English.
No, it's not English. It's the IPA or the International Phonetic Alphabet. So this is something that is separate from English, and it's a whole science unto itself for pronunciation and making sound. But a small amount of it relates to English and the sounds that we make in English. And if you are studying English, it's a useful tool to get good pronunciation. So I would say learn a little bit about phonetics if you want to get good pronunciation. You don't need to get too into it. You just use it as a tool to help you. Now, I would say as well, your approach should be to become aware of the sort of 44 different sounds that we use in English. And there is sort of a general rule. I mean, as we've said, there's different ways to pronounce each one. So really there's more sounds, but become aware of those and try to identify which ones you have problems with. And then remember, this is what we always say. I'm sure someone in the chat will say it. Pronunciation is physical. So we make the sound, but we don't just think it and it comes out of our mouth. We actually do something physically with our mouth, our lips, our teeth, our tongue, and our vocal cords. And that is how sound is made. And if you're making a sound wrong, you're doing something wrong physically. Your tongue's in the wrong place. Your teeth are in the wrong place. Maybe your mouth is open too much. Your lips are in the wrong position. So yeah, try to break it down to the physical element. I would say that's my biggest tip for improving pronunciation.
Mm-hmm. And once you do know what sound it is that you're having trouble with, watch Colin's videos on that sound to help you practice.
Yeah. But yes, phonetics is not English. You don't need to know it. Most native speakers don't know anything about it. But it is a useful tool, and that's why we've made so many videos on it.
For sure.
But yeah, it's not English. It's a tool. That's the key. That's the key there. Okay, so we got a question from Pinar now.
Yeah, this is a good question.
Says, I don't understand the logic of this rule. Everyone has is correct, but I always assumed that it should be like everyone have, because the word everyone contains more than one.
And this is a really good observation. And it's not just true of everyone. There, anyone, someone. There's lots of different. These are called collective nouns, and we use the singular for them, even though they refer to many different people. So we say, everyone is, not everyone are, right? Now, but the reason for this is actually pretty simple. If you think about a group, like you might say, the English Language Club is a great place to go to talk and ask questions about English. Well, the English Language Club isn't just one person, right? It's lots of people, right? And the same thing, like, you might talk about, the UK. You talk about it as a country, even though the UK as an entity isn't a person, but it's made up of lots and lots of people, right? These are collective nouns. So singular can refer to, like one of something or one group. And that's what's going on here. Everyone is just one group, right? And the UK is just one group of people, right? A dozen is, right? Because it's just one group of things, right? So that's actually what's going on there. When you use groups, as long as it's just one group you're talking about, you still use singular verbs, right? So yeah, that's a good question and a good observation, because it is one of those weird things when you're learning. Why do I say everyone is, everyone has? That doesn't make sense. But remember, singular can refer to one thing or one group. Right?
Great. Yeah. I can't add anything to that explanation. That's brilliant. I hope that's helpful. We have got quite a lot more people watching now. So if you have just joined us, thank you very much. You're very welcome. Please say hi in the chat. And if you have a question as well, please put that question in the chat, and we will get to it when we can. If you have already asked a question, we're just working our way through the ones we already have, and we will get to you at some point. I'm pretty sure any question that's been asked so far, we will get to today.
Yes. And by the way, hi to Vitaly, and of course, Gabrielle, Jack, and Gogu, and Khan, and Shay. Welcome.
Shay.
It's exciting to have everyone.
Yes. So next question is from Gabrielle, who says, I know you're passionate about tenses. So my question is how to make tenses make sense. Thanks, guys.
What an interesting and familiar question. I promise Gabrielle is not she's not on our payroll. She's not answering our questions or asking questions for us.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't understand what's going on, we have a course which is called Inside English, and our sort of tagline for the course is making tense make sense. So I guess we've got these three sort of keys or key ideas that we think are taught, well, they're not really taught normally in English textbooks or courses. What are they, Tony? The first one is about the fact that there's three kind of what do we call it?
Structures, main structures to the English sentence, right? The way we use verbs.
Yeah, a sentence can either be positive, for example, I live in the UK, or it can be negative, I don't live in the UK, or it can be a question. Do I live in the UK? Do I live in the UK? Yes. So, and basically, all three of those structures can exist in any tense and with any verb. So those, and it's just a question of moving the order of the words or adding not.
And adding it in the right place, adding it to the auxiliary verb or moving the auxiliary verb, right? And that focus is also a big part of it, right?
Yeah.
In fact, that's one of the big ideas.
Yeah, that's big idea number one. Three structures: positive, negative, and question. Structure number two. What's that?
Big idea number two is that tense. Like we think, how many tenses are there? Are there 9 tenses? Are there 12 tenses? Are there 7? Different people will say different things. But the point is that tense is broken up into 2 pieces, right? There's what we call the time of action and the type of action. Some places call this time and aspect, right? Whether something happens in the past, present, and the future, or actually whether you're talking about something in the past, present, or future. The time you're talking about is half of it. The other half is how finished is that action? Is it ongoing? Is it already finished? Or are we kind of leaving that information out? And that's where we get the perfect tenses, are where we're talking about something that's already finished, and we're talking about the consequences. Or the continuous action is we're talking about something that is in the middle of happening when we're talking about it. And then simple is where we leave that information out, right? So if you, instead of memorizing all the different tenses, you just have to understand how the time of action works and how the type of action works. And so then you can immediately connect those. They form a grid, right? To come up with any tense, right?
Yeah. So you've got the 3 times of action: past, present, future, and then the 3 types of action: continuous, perfect, and simple. So if you multiply them, you get a sort of grid of 9 tenses. But then you've also got 3 additional, more advanced tenses, because you can have a tense that is both perfect and continuous.
Yeah, for sure.
Now it's the simple tenses are what I think cause a lot of problems in a way, because we often learn them first, and the thing about simple tenses, which ties in with our third big idea, is that they often don't need the auxiliary verb
in the positive.
Positive, when they're in the positive structure. So you don't need to say I do live in the UK. You just say I live in the UK. Although I do live is the sort of complete structure, and you can say that. It's not wrong to say that. It just, when you do, it becomes sort of more emphatic, to emphasize. Our third big idea is that tense is all about the auxiliary verbs. It's not about the form of the main verb, like it is in a lot of other languages. Although that does change a lot of the time, it's not the most important thing to understand what a tense is. But because the simple tenses are the most common, courses and textbooks, they often tackle them first. But as Tony mentioned, the thing about a simple tense is that it doesn't tell you anything about the when an action starts or finishes. So it's so learning that first without knowing how tense does talk about it, it doesn't really you kind of need to know about how, the continuous and the perfect tenses first in order to understand what it means to not be saying anything about the time of the action or the type of the action.
The type of action, yeah.
So
you learn a lot of patterns when you're learning the simple tenses that you think, oh, this is the way it works, and then you have to learn a lot of exceptions to those patterns. But that's not really what's going on. The simple tenses are the exceptions. This always happens. The things that get used the most get simplified and become exceptions to the rule, right? So you can learn simple tenses, and then you can learn 9 different exceptions to that, right? Because all the other tenses don't work that way. Or you can learn how all the tenses work in all of the structures, and then say, oh, present simple and past simple are slightly different, but only in the positive structure. And then it just becomes a lot easier to understand. So like focusing on the structure, separating tense into 2 separate things, focusing on I keep trying to say it, I'm having a block. Of action? No, the word, the
form of auxiliary.
No,
verb?
the verb that comes before the main verb. I don't know. I'm having a complete
the auxiliary
block.
Verb.
The auxiliary verb. Sorry, sometimes I get a word and just can't say it. It's like it disappears from my head. So focusing on the auxiliary verb, and seeing the whole pattern instead of just starting with simple tenses. These are the things that we really think make tense make sense. If you understand how it works, instead of focusing on all the exceptions, it makes when to use which tense clearer. It makes understanding what they mean by using a tense much clearer. And it makes you able to use a tense with a word you've never tried before easily, because you're just following the patterns.
Yeah, so many courses and textbooks that I've taught on in the past, they focus on, start with the simple tenses, and then they talk about exceptions and the irregular verbs, because you end up, you have to, because there's just so many of them. But then it just becomes a distraction from the thing that actually makes tense make sense. So we talk about peeling back those layers. We avoid talking about the irregular verbs and things, and get straight to that heart of the matter, which is auxiliary verbs. And I mean, we do talk about the irregular verbs a little bit, but only in a way that, where they make sense, because we've already shown the actual structure, how it actually works at its core. So yeah, great. Thank you so much for that question, Gabrielle.
Yes.
It was almost like we'd asked you to ask that. I mean, you can tell that I think you can tell we are passionate about this. It's something we've been working on a lot this last year. So thank you. Okay. So Jack Smith has a question here. Hi, I have 2 questions. What is an intransitive verb? And why future tenses, future simple, future continuous, and future perfect are not included as passive voice? Thank you. Okay.
Good question.
Let's start with the first question. What is an intransitive verb?
So an intransitive verb, transitive means it like travels through something to somewhere. A transitive verb is like a tunnel. It needs something on the other end. So what it needs is usually an object, right? Like a good example is eat. I ate a sandwich. That's transitive because it had a subject and an object, right? I ate a sandwich. I drank a soda, whatever. Intransitive is when there's nothing on the other side. Like, just I ate, right? And so some verbs you can use intransitively or transitively. You might ask, are you hungry? No, I already ate. It was intransitive. You didn't say what you ate. You would just say that you ate. So, and some verbs can only be used transitively or only be used intransitively, right? I'm trying to think of an example of a verb that can only be used intransitively. They died. They died. Like you don't die something, right?
No, but then you do have
intransitive.
You do have the word kill, which is similar,
which is the transitive version of it. Yeah. It's also active.
It's about how it relates to the object. You've got the subject and the object of the verb. So is it fair to say intransitive verbs can't take an object?
Yes. Or again, if a verb can be used intransitively, it means it has no object. An intransitive verb is sometimes something that people say to mean a verb that can only be used intransitively. But really, most verbs can be used in both ways depending on the situation. Right? Yeah.
Well,
that's a good question.
Great question, Jack. And I'm glad I've got you here, Tony, because that is the kind of question that is sort of on the periphery. It's a bit sort of getting too into the grammar and not enough about English. Yeah. It's a bit quite technical. It's similar to the phonetics. It's a big subject, but it's only a small amount of it really, I think, is that helpful for learning English. And so I tend to focus on what I think is really, really helpful. But that's a really good question. So thank you for that. There was part two.
There was part two.
Part two. And why future tenses are not included as passive voice. So is that right? Can you not?
Actually, future tenses are, the reason they're not included is because they are not passive voice, right? Passive voice is different. Passive voice is not a tense. It's something you can do, you can add to any tense. Now, I've seen some people getting confused with, say, the future tenses and passive voice because of the word be. Like, I will be seeing you, or whatever. That's not actually the passive voice, right? That's actually the future continuous, right? The thing about it is, and one of the keys to that we talk about in the Inside English course is that each auxiliary verb forces the next verb into a certain form.
But it can be more than one auxiliary
But there can be more than one. It doesn't force it. So usually it forces the main verb into that form, right? Usually. So be, the auxiliary verb be, forces the word after it into its ing form. So like I am running, right? But if there's another auxiliary verb, then, and that's the next verb, then it forces that verb to change form instead of the main verb. Will forces the next verb into its base form, right? It's most simple form.
And will is how we make the future, or one of the ways we make the future. So when you have a future tense, you've got two auxiliary verbs. So the auxiliary verb for the continuous tenses is to be, or be. So to make it future, I will be running, whereas we would say I am running,
right,
if it's continuous. So going back to the passive. So the passive is not actually a tense, but grammatically it does work in a very similar way as tenses, in that we add the auxiliary verb to be, which is the same as continuous tenses. So that's a little confusing. And then we change it modifies the following verb to be a the past participle form. So you can have a future passive. You can say, my house will be built next year. That is future passive. Yeah. So built is the main verb, and that is in the past participle form because the previous verb is be, but it's not continuous be, it's passive be. So it's making the following verb, past participle. And then the future is being made by the will auxiliary verb.
Yeah. So you can make a passive voice in the future, but they're two separate things. Right, you can make any tense into passive, I think, just by adding in one extra auxiliary verb, the be, and changing the base form.
Now, would passive always come last? So
I'm not going to say for sure that it would. Like, I think that there might. It does seem like it should, but I'm not.
I think so.
I'm not so confident. I'm going to say yes. This is the rule.
But so sentences can get very complicated when they're passive because of the extra auxiliary verb.
Extra.
So
especially in the future where there's already two auxiliary verbs.
Yeah. So if you've got a future continuous passive, like next month, this house will have been. Well, that's perfect, isn't it? So yeah, next month, this house will have been being built. So you've got 5 verbs there. 4 of them are auxiliary verbs. So yeah, it can get very complicated, but it's logical. There is a logic that it follows, and if you understand that logic, and that's what we're getting at in the course. That's what we're trying to make sense of, that logic. So even though things get really complicated, if you understand that logic, you can figure it out.
Yes.
Even though whereas the way that it's often taught is just you look at a sentence like that and it doesn't make any sense. So yeah, great questions, Jack. Thank you very much for that. I hope that's helpful. If it was helpful, please give us a thumbs up. We've got 25 or 20 or so people watching, which is great. If you are watching, please, if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat and we will do our best to get to them. So let's see. The next question is from Go, I think.
Yeah, a comment from
it's just a comment. I want to thank you for your help. Truly, I found this channel the best channel in YouTube in teaching English. Thank you both. Thanks both of you teachers. Great, thank you, Gogo. That's really helpful. Really appreciate that.
Really glad it's helping.
Yeah. Okay, Pinar, I think, has a question here, which I will read. I've watched those videos as a foreigner, and I really think that you should use a phonetic chart as an alphabet. I think it would be more clear to understand pronunciation. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the whole point of the International Phonetic Alphabet. But as you know, it's not what you see written everywhere. So we have to write. Yeah. We use it when we're talking to specify the pronunciation and to help with pronunciation, because that's what it's for. But obviously, I mean, yeah, I think it would be great if we just switched everything to the
using the IPA.
Yeah, it would make
there is actually a really good reason not to do that, but I don't want to. That would be an interesting question. That if, for example, Gabrielle wanted to ask that question sometime, but yeah, if we were inventing a language, we would do it differently. But we're stuck with English. We can't. We don't have the ability to convince everyone to start spelling their English using the IPA. More's the pity.
Yeah. Okay. Zahira on Facebook has a question.
Oh, great.
They say, apart from making plural, does adding an S to nouns convey a different meaning from when they are singular?
To nouns. Well, of course, remember in verbs, adding the S means you're talking about the third person singular. Yeah. He talks, she talks, that kind of thing. So some nouns end in an S for a reason that is historical, but is not currently valid. Obviously, we also add an apostrophe S either to mean with a verb, it would be a contraction, right, with is, or to a noun, it would show possession, right?
Right. So yeah,
but
so you could say the box's contents.
Right.
You're talking about the contents that box possesses. Then you'd use the apostrophe, even though it's an object and not a person.
Exactly. So we use the S for a bunch of different things, but adding just an S to a noun, again, there are some words that have the S on the end of them because of a historical reason why the S was added, that conveys something different. But I think in English, the only thing that adding an S usually does is make something plural. Now, some words have a different kind of meaning in the plural, so you would use them differently. The plural of fruit is just fruit. It's not fruits, right? But when you talk about fruits, that doesn't mean actual fruit. It means the results. We talk about the fruits of our labor, right? So in the plural, it just means something different, right? It's not, I mean, it is plural, but it also has a different definition, right?
Yeah, because there's certain words like fruit, like you say, sheep is a word that we don't put into plural, and fish.
Yeah.
Although you will hear people talking about fishes, but that's not technically correct. We have one. It's the same in the plural. But I think that's partly down to, or it's evolved.
It's just what sounds.
Due to it's what's easier to say because it ends with that sh sound, like the word.
Mouse and becomes mice because mouses is just.
Mouses is.
Mouses.
Yeah. So I think
good question.
It's a good question, but I think the answer is
not really. I mean, again, some certain words, and like I said, sometimes a word has a different meaning in the plural, but generally speaking, we only add s to an existing noun to make it plural. Just an s. If it's apostrophe s, it's possession.
Yeah. Okay. Now we've got a few
questions today. We've got to move faster.
Yes, we've got a few questions from Susanna, which is always great. So first one is, what does to do something unilaterally mean?
So unilateral is just Latin for one side. So one-sided means you did it without checking to see if it was okay with everyone, right? Like if you share a fence between your house and your neighbor's house, and they decide to take down the fence, but they don't ask you. They did it unilaterally, right? So when one side makes a decision without consulting everyone else, that's unilaterally.
Right. So, and it's interesting also here to point out that this sort of "ally" on the end of a word, does that making it an adjective?
Makes it an adverb.
An adverb, an adverb.
Right.
So unilateral. That would be the adjective. Yeah.
And unilaterally makes it an adverb. So it can describe it describes do. Right.
Yeah. And the prefix uni, that's sort of the one side.
Means one.
In this case. But in this word, the later part in the middle is not really
it comes from lateral is an old it's not in English, but lateral does mean lined up in English. Right. It's a word that means lines. Right. So unilateral means one-sided, or unilaterally means to do something one-sided.
Great. Yeah. Okay. We've got another Lee word in the next question. What does demographically unsustainable mean? So let's break this down here. So. Demograph is that
demographics demographics means the makeup of a population, the people's age, the different percentages of people in different situations or who speak different languages, male, female, this kind of stuff. How many different people are married or single, any like statistics about your population is demographics.
Yeah. But does the word, because "ick" and can be a kind of added onto the words, is demograph that's kind of the root word? Is that?
No. I mean, this is an example of a word that's built up of root words in another language. It's like Greek or Latin. You see this a lot, but in English, this is not. There's not the for instance, this has nothing to do with the word graph in English. But it does have something to do with the word graph in languages older than English, which we can mean to measure or to, and we use this a lot for statistics. Demography, a demographer, for example, is a person who studies population statistics. And so, of course, unsustainable. That one also is a good one that can be kind of broken down. Right.
Yeah. Yes, because you got to sustain. That means to keep something going.
Keep something going.
In fact, sustain is a word that is used in music to talk about the
keep your notes going. Yeah,
the length of a note. It's got a lot of sustain. Means you can make long notes. So sustainable, that makes that
means it can
so
be.
sustain is a noun. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So and then able, if you add able to the end, it makes it a verb. It makes it
it's an adjective, and it says
you can do it.
You can. Yeah. You can.
Yeah. And then at the beginning is making it the negative. So you can't.
So demographically unsustainable means you're talking about something and you're looking at the population statistics and you're saying we can't keep this going. An example is if the birth rate is less than one, if each person on average is having less than one child, then your population is not going to be able to grow.
Or each couple is having less than two. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's examples of that kind of thing. Another one that people talk about in the news a lot is that if a significant percentage of the population is in retirement age or past, then the rest of the population has to take care of those people, depending. And that can be, if you have a very large population that's about to retire or is already retired, that might be something people talk about as being demographically unsustainable. It just means that the population makeup shows us that this is not something that we can keep going.
Yeah. Great. Okay. And next one from Susanna. Which one is correct? In a rainy day or on a rainy day? Well, my mug here is going to be relevant for that, about prepositions. Anyway, I'll leave. So yeah, in or on a rainy day?
Yeah, it would be on a rainy day, right?
Yeah, it's always we never talk about saying in a day. We say in a month, but
we say in for parts of days sometimes. Like in the afternoon, right? In the morning. Day we use on usually. Yeah, so that's definitely on a rainy day, or on a sunny day, or on a stormy day. Doesn't matter because we're talking about a day.
Or on Wednesday.
Yes.
On Tuesday. Yes. On Tuesday we do our live stream. Okay. And what does fundamentally disagree mean?
Well, fundamentally just means at its most core. This means that you're not disagreeing about something relatively minor. You absolutely disagree at the core of the issue, right? So there's no way you're going to convince each other or you're going to, be able to make a happy compromise, because at the very core of the issue, you see it completely differently.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, thank you for your questions, as always, Susanna.
Always exciting.
Yeah. Now, another one from Gogo here. Quite a long one. So I quote, "You will join the court of the French Queen and stay there until your father has given you blah, blah, blah. Has forgiven you." Yeah. So my question is, how come using the present perfect after the future? Is this grammatically correct? So the present perfect there is referring to your father has forgiven you.
Yeah. So this is really just the future is the you will join.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This is really just an example of how in English, but actually in lots of languages, we often use the present with some kind of indicator of what time we're talking about to talk about the future. Like, we say my train comes in tonight, right? Well, I use the present, even though this is in the future, right? Yeah. So here they use the word until to show that we're talking about the future. So that's just really common. We actually use the present tenses to talk about the future, maybe more often than we use the future tenses to talk about the future in English. And again, this is true actually in a lot of languages. Certainly not all, but even all that have tenses. But it is very common, and I think it's becoming even more common.
Yeah, and in this sentence, we're not referring to a specific time. We're referring to when a situation has changed. And that's what we use the perfect tense for. The perfect tense is to talk about something that has completed or something has had an effect on the time we're talking about. Now, we don't know exactly when we're talking about, but we just want to know that this effect has happened, so that you have been forgiven. And that word until is what allows us to do that. So yeah, that's what's going on here. And so that is perfectly correct. Great question. Thank you.
Before we skip on, there was a question about our last one about fundamentally disagree. Right near just recently, Mauro said, could fundamentally disagree also mean that the person disagrees with the core, but agrees with some aspects of it? And sure, that might be the case, but that's not what fundamentally disagree is talking about. If you agree with some aspects of it, you'd have to say that separately. That's not what fundamentally disagree means, right? Fundamentally disagree means you disagree at the core, which usually means you disagree with everything, but it doesn't specifically mean you disagree at the core, but maybe you agree on some other things, right? So you'd have to say that separate. That phrase doesn't mean it by itself. But a good question. Yeah.
Okay, so next question from Sonia about the word must. Very good. There we are.
Yes.
I have a question. When can I use must, or when should I use must?
So yeah, the funny thing is, you could say, when must I use must, right? Honestly, though, I don't know about the UK, but honestly, people don't use must very often. They say have to, or should, right?
So should, have to, and must are all very similar, but I do think they are all slightly different.
They are slightly different, but must is slowly kind of coming out of its out of usage, and more often replaced with have to if you need that specific meaning of there is no choice, or they use should when they're just talking about really like I ought to. But must is not used very commonly anymore. Usually we would use have to, but you use must if you must use it. You use it when either there's no choice, like this has to happen, right? Or when something is you're almost like you're reminding yourself, like I must do this.
Yeah,
like you've decided you have to do it.
It's like have to, but it's more emphatic. And that's often what happens with these words that are sort of getting pushed out of the language. We can still use them, but to be more emphatic. Like what I was saying earlier about the auxiliary verbs in the present simple. You can say I live in the UK, but to be more emphatic, you can also say I do live in the UK. So I have to go now. It's the same as saying I must go now, but I must go is sort of more emphatic. Now, this is something that is quite confusing for, I think, Spanish speakers and possibly people with other first languages as well, because you can literally translate have to into Spanish, tener que or tengo que, and it means the same thing. But when you make it negative, when you say I don't have to, what you do in English is you're removing the obligation. So if you have to do something, you have an obligation to do it. But if you make it negative, I don't have to go now. That means you don't have the obligation.
Right.
But in Spanish, when you make it negative, and probably in other languages too, you make it a negative obligation. So that is when we use must not.
Because mustn't, is about the only way you can make a negative obligation easily, right? You mustn't say things like that, right? That really does mean you must not do it. It doesn't mean you're free and you can do anything.
So that is a use where we do still use it, a negative obligation, because you can't use have to for a negative obligation.
Usually you would just say, you have to not do that. So again, must has its uses, but I just feel like it's something that is in like more and more being skipped because shouldn't is the same. Again, most of the time I think people would say you shouldn't do that instead of
but that's not as strong. strong.
It is
That's
not as strong.
You can. You shouldn't. You shouldn't.
Right.
But you can.
But again, I think that's what most people are saying more and more.
But you wouldn't say you have to not walk on the grass. You would say you mustn't walk on the grass.
Yes, correct.
So Mauro, but actually a sign, if you saw a sign, it would just say, it would use the imperative, do not walk on the grass.
Do not walk on the grass. So Mauro has the question, is have not to do something wrong? And yes, that would not be a correct way to make a negative in English. You could say, not I not have to.
You don't have to.
Not have to, or I don't have to means there's no obligation. You're free to choose.
And that's the confusing thing, because that's different in other languages. Yeah.
Right. To say the negative obligation, you could say you have to not do that, but that's not the most common way to say it. Though again, you could say it that way. The easiest way would be to say you mustn't do that, or you must not do that. It's just not super common.
Yeah. Great. I think that's a really interesting question, because of the way that it sort of literally translates or is used. The literal translation is used, but with a completely different meaning in other languages, and that causes a lot of confusion.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay. Gogo has another question. Similar thing. How can you have done this? You knew full well. My question is why the speaker didn't say could instead of can, since he is speaking without a past event. How can you have done this?
I'm curious as to if this is a quote from a very old book or not. It is true that in this sentence, grammatically, they probably mean could.
Yeah.
Could would be correct. How can you have done this? It's grammatically correct, but it's not the same question. You're basically asking them how they did it, but you're talking about something that they've already done in the past. It's like, how is this possible?
It's interesting though, because this sentence doesn't really mean what it literally says. Like, how can you have done this? It's like, it's a rhetorical question. I'm saying, I can't believe you did this.
Right.
Whereas if you say, I guess it comes down to tone as well. How can you have done this? Like, how did you do this? Maybe.
Right. But again, that's not what they mean. There's no way. If it was just the question, we wouldn't know. But since you have the beginning of the next question, we know that's not what they mean. So they meant could.
Yeah.
However, if this is something that's from a really old book, you see this kind of phrasing a lot more in 1800s English. And that's just because the word could and can have sort of changed in how they're used. Not which one is correct or which one is right, but sort of the idiomatic way of saying things has changed. Again, in English, we like to say things very indirectly, not why did you do that? But how could you have done that? And so that's sort of an idiom to change, to make something very indirect. And the way we've done that, like which words we use to make indirect statements, has changed over the years as patterns of politeness have changed.
Yeah. Great. Now, before we go any further, we're almost at an hour now.
Yeah,
Time has really flown by today. I've really enjoyed myself today. Tony, how are you feeling? I'm okay to go a little bit longer.
We could go a little bit longer, just a little bit.
We'll do a couple more questions. But yeah, if you're asking a question now, we may not get to it this week. But so it might be better if you actually go to our Discord channel. The link is in the description, and you can write a question there, and we will start with those questions next week. We're gonna start prioritizing those questions, just like today we started with some of those questions from previous comments. That's how we're going to start each week. So if you have a question now, either tune in early next time or head on over to Discord and write the question in there. So let's see. We got a question here from Gabrielle. Oh no, that's just a comment. Oh no. Oh yeah, no, that's a joke. Gabriel, he asking about the net, because he asked the perfect question for us earlier. Let's see. Flash So Nadia says, my problem, how to speak fluently and master all the tenses. Well, we talked a lot about, if you rewind to earlier on, we were talking about, Gabrielle's previous question about how to make tense make sense. That's how you master all the tenses. We've got 3 key ideas, which we talked about earlier. So rewind and listen to that. And if you like what we said, then you can always sign up to our course. If you head on over to englishlanguageclub.co.uk, our course there is called Inside English, and we go into detail about all of that. Let's see.
I'm sorry, did we get Ahmed's question about focusing on or focused on?
I didn't see that.
Right before Gabrielle's. And Fatuma's.
Right, yes. Okay. Yeah. So Ahmed says, hi, thank you for doing these. What's the difference between focusing on and focused on?
So I mean, the difference is that grammatically, one, I am focusing means that's the present continuous tense.
So that's what you're doing. Yeah.
That's you're doing. I am focused. Focused is an adjective here, not a verb. Though if you're talking about doing it to someone else, but anyway, so it's just grammatically, one is I am focused. You're describing yourself, whereas I'm focusing means that's the verb of the sentence.
So the main verb of the second sentence, I am focused, is to be. I am. To be. In that sentence, it's not an auxiliary verb. Right. That's the confusion here. Yeah.
Yes. But they, as far as what they mean, they're very, very similar. To the point of I wouldn't even necessarily say there is a difference, at least in that short of a sentence. So really the difference there is just how you're choosing to say it, either as a verb or as an adjective. Right.
Great. Okay, then Fatuma had a question. How can the word could be used in several ways? Thanks for understanding. So the word could. Yeah, so I feel like could is a strange word, isn't it? Because it's the past, technically it's the past tense of can.
But it's also used as a sort of subjunctive, talking about like possibilities. So you ask, could you help me? Right? You're not asking in the past, were you able? Right? No. You're saying, can you right now? Right?
Yeah.
Those are probably the 2 most common. Like to use could to can in the past. He could have been there, right? Although in that case, it almost means more like might, right? So sometimes it means might. Sometimes it means can, but in the past tense. Sometimes it means will you or please do this, right? It's a very, very flexible word.
And that's why I think it's difficult to understand. And the whole idea of using the way we use the past tense to make something talk about something hypothetical or
is very confusing.
I could have done that, but I didn't. It's confusing and also interesting. It also ties in with the conditionals, like if I were you, we're talking about the present, but we're using a past tense form, and that's the same thing because we're creating a kind of alternate possible reality kind of thing.
Yes.
It's interesting stuff, but I don't think we've got time to get into that now. I think we've got time for a few more questions. As we've got so many people watching, I do kind of want to keep going. Let's see.
So let's see. From Vitali has the question rise and raise. So it's not really a question, but I assume you mean what's the difference between rise and raise? And this is an interesting one because it goes back to one of our earlier questions. At its core, the difference is that one is intransitive and the other is transitive. You use rise when whatever the subject is actually doing the rising, right? I rise from my chair, or what it'd make my grandparents rise from their graves or something like that. You don't rise a thing, right? You don't rise something. Someone rises. It's an intransitive verb when they themselves are doing the rising. But
so this ties in with our earlier question about transitive verbs.
Exactly, yes. But raise is transitive. You have to raise something. I raise my hand. My hand is rising. Grammatically, I'm saying that the hand is doing the rising, right? But but I raise my hand, right? Meaning I'm the one I'm raising this other thing, my hand. And that's really the difference.
You raise a flag, and the flag rises.
You raise something, but something just rises.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So that's a good question, Vitaly.
Yeah. Great. Now we've got one here from Lal Tesh, who says, I studied triphthongs or triphthong vowels in a book, but you taught us two type. Why? So, well, we don't really talk about triphthongs very much. And I know that a lot of people have asked me to do a video on that. And I think eventually I will do.
Probably. One day.
But it's just, the reason I haven't is because it is, getting a bit too deep into phonetics. And that's not what we're really about. We're really about teaching English and focusing on what's really helpful for people in English, for people learning English, rather than trying to cover all of phonetics, because that would take forever. And I don't think it would be that useful. But yeah, so triphthongs are like diphthongs, except there's kind of three sounds. I can't think of any.
They're not something that we really need to process as much. Like the diphthongs are just very, very important. They explain why a lot of things are not pronounced the way you think they are by looking at it. Triphthongs are not as big of a deal. It's not that we are pretending that triphthongs don't exist. It's just not what we don't see it as useful as a tool.
There is that phonetic chart, which very smart people who've a lot of who are much smarter than me and have a lot more experience teaching English than me have come up with. I think the guy's name is Adrian Underhill, who came up with the phonetic chart, and that doesn't have the triphthongs on. And I'm sure that he had a good reason for doing that, which is it's just going too deep into phonetics. I think if you understand the diphthongs, you can understand triphthongs, because it's the same thing. It's just 3 instead of 2, and so that is that a diphthong is two vowel sounds that are pronounced within the same syllable. So like ia, ua, our, aya, so a triphthong would be a similar thing, but it's not something I've thought about too much, which is why I haven't done a video on it yet. So yeah, that's why. But thank you for your question. I hope that is helpful. Let's see then. Now this is an interesting one. Ahmed says, what is the difference between up the street versus down the street? He lives up the street from me, or he lives down the street from me. So we talked about this.
Yeah, we talked about this once. This comes historically from up the river and down the river. Down the river means in the same direction the river is flowing, and up the river means opposite. So when you are giving directions and you told someone you're going to go to the river, then go up the river, you can look at the river, tell what direction the water is flowing, and then go the opposite, right? And also, because water flows downhill. Up or down can also refer to elevation. So if your street is on a hill, up the street is usually literally up the street. Down the street is literally down. But so again, we talked about the difference between uptown and downtown several months ago, I think, and how downtown is down the river. It's more closer to the mouth of the river, so that's where the harbor is going to be. But it's also a little bit not as nice because all the trash that people upriver throw in the river comes downriver. So there's a very different, downtown is the more industrial or more center of the city. Uptown is more like the nicer parts of the city, even in cities that don't have a river. So some places will have a very specific up the street, down the street. Like if one side of the street is downtown and one side is uptown. But most of the time, the vast majority of the time when people say this, there is no difference, right? At least in the UK, North America, there are some specific places where it means something different. But
in that,
most
in that
of the
example,
time it means
up the street or down the street, unless the street has an incline that is noticeable.
Sometimes people will refer to this by the house numbers. Up the street means that the street numbers are getting bigger. Down the street means street numbers are getting smaller. But I have literally never heard someone actually say it meaning that. I know that exists.
I think also whenever someone says this, there would be some kind of some body language that implies which way they would say up the street or down the street. So there's most of the time they're interchangeable.
Mostly, yeah. Which makes them not very helpful.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Okay, we're going to make this the last question. So if we haven't got to your question, then I'm sorry about that. But yeah, do head over to Discord and we can start talking about that.
Yes, put your question on Discord. Yeah,
there's a channel in the Discord server for questions for the live stream, and we will start with those questions next week. So check out our Discord. We've also got the course that we've talked about, Inside English, which has come up quite a lot today. But yeah, this will be the last question from Zahira, who's on Facebook. Zahira says, ethic and ethics, there's a difference in meaning. What's the difference between ethic and ethics?
Well, ethics is the study of what's right and wrong. But an ethic, again, this is an example like we were talking about earlier, where a word has just a different meaning in the plural. Here, ethics, the plural, is the more common meaning. But an ethic refers to your own beliefs, not necessarily beliefs, but the if you were to write down what your beliefs are, even if you don't know them. Like we talk about a work ethic, means
that's the most common.
That someone like they work hard and they value hard work and they believe that hard work is good, right? There's other kinds. You say like I just really like this person's ethic. All right, you're talking about the way that they see things and do things. Work ethic is by far the most common, at least in North America. I assume also in the UK. When we talk about someone's ethic, right?
Yeah.
But it's not the same. Notice, like your ethics are what you believe is right and wrong, but your ethic is not quite the same. It's more like what you believe about. That shows in how you do things. Like your work ethic shows in how hard you work and how hard you value other people's work.
Yeah. Okay, great. So thank you for that question, and thank you for all the questions today. It's been really good. I've really enjoyed today's live stream. We've had quite a lot of people watching, so that's great. Things will continue during the week. Let's try. I want to try and get the Discord going. I'll be in there a few times this week to check on things. And yeah, if we did miss your question or you come up with a question during the week, put it in the Discord, and we will start with those questions. I have noticed that a few questions came up there during the week, and I was like, great, we'll start with those. But then they were deleted or they disappeared or something. So. Don't be shy don't be shy. Don't think that even if you ask a question and then you learn the answer yourself, the fact that you wanted to ask that question means that other people might have that question as well. Exactly. So it'd still be fun to talk about them.
So check out the link to the Discord. It's the bottom link in the description. And join us there and put your questions for the live stream there. So we'll be sure to get to them next week.
Great. Okay, well, thank you for watching, and we will see you next week.